right, everyone, we are moving into what I consider some of the fun and meaty bits of this particular security discussion. We're getting into some really cool stuff here. Now, what today we're going to talk about here in this particular section is going to be around passwords in Azure Active Directory. And some of the things, and this is just a forewarning, some of the things here, they may be a bit controversial. And they may be outside of the norm, but I will explain why. But let's dive in here as we continue having this conversation. All right, so on-premise logic. Again, when we're talking about passwords, okay, on-premise we have password policies. So again, this is not very, we'll call it uncommon. When we have passwords themselves, they have to have X number of characters, Y number of special characters, Z number of uppercase, lowercase numbers. We've all seen that. Password complexity requirements, essentially. We will have password exploratory requirement. So again, hey, these passwords expire after a period of time. We're not allowed to repeat passwords. No easy to guess passwords. We're not allowed to use password 123 as a password. We're not allowed to use some of these things on here. Now, these are very common. We've seen these all before. However, I want to also very clearly state none of that matters. None of that truly matters. The complexity level of your password, any of that, it doesn't matter anymore. You can have a 1,000,000 character password. Sure, that would take forever to essentially brute force attack or anything like that. But again, at the end of the day, with all of the new computing functions here, we have these new neural computers that are coming out, these new neural computing functions where, we can just do quantum things in seconds. Well, we can do permutations in fractions of seconds now, and we can guess passwords in just minutes, even the complicated ones. It doesn't matter. But the real big factor here is that it has nothing to do with the technology. Humans are the ones that make mistakes. Computers do not. And I want you to understand that because it's a very, very important concept here. So what we have to do is we have to be able to increase our security posture in many different ways, okay? We do this through, again, many different formats. One format, and I think is probably the most important above everything else that we talk about here. We will get to this in time, but this is around the idea of, well, training our users. Social engineering. Understanding, having users understand that, hey, this may be a phishing email. This is a suspicious email. They're trying to get my password, I think. I don't know. And we're going to tell somebody about it. Hey, I'm going to forward this to the security group so they can look at it and investigate. Hey, if it's not, no problem at all. If it is, great. You just essentially factored that out. Doesn't matter how complex your password is when users will use whatever they want. Trust me. Microsoft has done a lot of research on this, and they have spent a lot of money on this. So when we're talking about Azure Active Directory, Microsoft has actually learned a lot. And this is one thing that Microsoft 365 really have above just about any other type of cloud service. They can process, okay, and this is per day, 6.5 trillion signals per day. And what that means is those are typed login attempts, or we'll say anything that a user, we'll say in some format or function, that a user or something is logging into Azure Active Directory. 6.5 trillion signals per day they're getting, and they're analyzing these. Now, again, Microsoft's a software company here, but they also have a very complex machine learning system that's in the back end. And what it's doing is it's processing all of these signals that are coming in, and it's analyzing. And we get to, well, look at it in a little bit different of a light. As we start getting patterns of the way that people are trying to compromise accounts that are potentially risky or are potentially we'll say malicious. That's another thing that we have to really look at as well. Well, when we were looking at all of this, Microsoft learned quite a lot. They've learned a lot of things about this here. So let's kind of start talking about, well, how do we protect this in a modern network? Again, if we determine that your password truly doesn't matter when it comes down to the complexity, the length, the expirations on it and everything, it doesn't matter. Well, according to Microsoft's research here, and remember, like I said, they have a lot of research and a lot of data that they can actually utilize this. Here's a statistic directly from them. Your account is more than 99.9% less likely to be compromised if you use multi-factor authentication. Now, I'm sure we probably all at some point in time in our lives have used some form of multi-factor authentication, whether it's our bank, whether it's using some application that already requires it, maybe at work, whatever it may be. Multi-factor authentication is right now the industry standard way of protecting ourselves. Is it the only way? Is it the best end-all be-all way? Absolutely not. However, 99.9% less likely to be compromised if you use Microsoft, or not even Microsoft MFA, just MFA of any sort. It doesn't have to be Azure MFA, so I want to be clear with that. However, we get a lot of tools with the Azure MFA. So let's take a step back here. Is how does MFA truly work? Well, again, this is straight from Microsoft here, is that Azure MFA requires, or authentication is coming by requiring 2 or more of the following authentication methods. First, something you know, typically a password. So again, we all have passwords. Something you have, a trusted device that's not easily duplicated, phone, hardware key. So this is something like a FIDO key or some sort of, again, a phone, an app on our phone. Now, I will say as we go through this here, I do not recommend SMS or phone calls for the trusted device because I do not consider SMS or phone calls trusted. It is actually quite easy to duplicate SIM cards. And when we do that, we can actually hijack those messages going to you. And it's actually pretty easy nowadays. And it's a very common vector of attack that I'm seeing with some of my customers have actually kind of fallen problem with this. However, anything is better than nothing. And a lot of times what I normally end up seeing phone calls from are going to be people who maybe you're in like a manufacturing setting and they will have a phone, like a desk phone attached to the computer or near a computer. And this could be like a kiosk type machine or somebody will actually, and they will get a phone call and then they have to essentially do it. So like I said, that's one piece of it. There is actually a third piece here, which is becoming much, much, much more prevalent because the technology and the hardware is getting there. Something you are. Biometrics, fingerprint, face scan. These are big things that we're seeing here nowadays. I mean, anybody who has a mobile phone nowadays has some sort of face scan or fingerprint scan on it. So again, biometrics are very difficult to crack. We can't just put a picture of somebody up there. It actually senses heat. There's a lot of other things that come along with it here. So you got to be very careful with the way this all works. However, these are our common ways of doing things. And I have a reference on here too that essentially shows this as well, because again, I use Microsoft's technology and their articles and knowledge bases all day, every day. I'm in it all the time. We're actually going to look at one here in just a little bit. But just to give you an idea, this is what MFA does. As I'm logging in, it's asking me for something else. I type in my passcode. Hey, maybe I'm using a FIDO key. Maybe I'm using the mobile app, which that's what we'll be setting up here in lab is the mobile app. Very easy to set up and work with. Or I also have in my labs, I have Windows Hello for Business, which can take your fingerprint. You press your fingerprint down there and it automatically shines you in. It scans your face as well. That's another thing we can use Windows Hello for Business to. I sit down in front of the computer, it scans my face, boom, signs me in automatically. As the technology and the hardware becomes better and more advanced, we will start seeing these a lot more because they're easier to work with. So let's look at C here. This is the last bit of this that I want to talk about is because there is a piece that I want to show you. Microsoft actually has recommendations here on securing your identity infrastructure. So let's look at these here real quick. I'm going to pull this up over here. So here are 5 steps. Now, they're not necessarily 5 just steps. They're actually sub-steps of each one of them here. But there's a lot that comes along with this here. And this is actually a very great article to have because it's just a good piece of reference. Okay. When we're looking at security and how we're going to secure our users and everything that they log in, we want to reduce our attack surface areas. We want to increase our security posture. So when we're looking at it, here's essentially the 5 top level here: strengthen our credentials, reduce attack surface area, automate threat response, use cloud intelligence, and enable end user self-service. This is one of the biggest things, and I cannot express how important self-service is and enablement for end users. When we start getting into some of the actual applications, there's going to be a lot of pieces where you're like, why on earth is that set like that? Well, Microsoft errs always on the idea of enablement of the end user, because allowing the users to be able to do their job with the least amount of roadblocks in front of them as possible, that is what their goal is, but still be able to maintain a secure and safe environment for them. That's where we balance that line, and that's one of the big factors that I work with all of my customers on, is we have to balance that line. Again, when I tell my customers that your password expirations and all of that stuff, get rid of it. It's useless. They don't do anything anymore, because the problem comes into play is when you have password expirations, people may have, I don't know, here's password 1, and then they expire. Guess what they're going to do for the next one? Password 2. Oh, and then they're going to do for the next one, password 3. That's what people do. Regular users will do that. Regular human beings will do that. Password expirations are not recommended anymore. So going through here, one of the first things we want to do is strengthen credentials. And I'm not going to read this verbatim here, of course. But again, we want to make sure we use strong authentication. We're going to start using conditional access, which we're going to get to, and that's going to be in this lab here in just a minute. Start banning commonly attacked passwords and turn off traditional complexity and expiration rules. Get rid of the complexity stuff. If you want your users to use password 1234, that's fine. It's not going to hurt anything as long as they're using some other very strong form of that multi-factor authentication. I know that is a crazy concept, on which I said some of this stuff is very controversial, but that's not really that bad. Remember, this is modern networks. We have to understand that, because we have so many other tools that are available to us that we can look at so many different things. And we're going to be looking at these here in just a little bit. Start banning these commonly attacked passwords. Okay, maybe we don't want password 123. That's fine. But maybe we don't want to have a 25-character complexity, and maybe we don't want those passwords to expire. We want to make sure that users are going to utilize the passwords that they have, and they're not going to continually use some sort of pattern. NIST has also shown this too. So NIST is a government entity. It's the National Institutes of Standards, and I forget what actually the T is for. Oh, Standards and Technology, excuse me. So they actually have information on here that they've written that is actually getting rid of complexity and password expiration rules. I know, as I said, it's kind of a crazy concept here, but it's a good practice to have. Getting rid of these commonly used passwords, that's fine. You want to get rid of password 123, that's fine. But maybe I want to have a password of Matt is cool, 1234. Okay, that's fine. So again, common ones, and there's actually quite a long list of common ones. You'd be surprised. Password is one of the most commonly used passwords out there. That's just one of these concepts. Leaked credentials, resilience against outages. So again, remember when I said password hash sync is the best practice here? That's what Microsoft recommends. Use password hash sync. There's no on-premise dependencies. We don't have to worry about anything going down on-premise because password hash sync is working. But one of the other great benefits that we get with password hash sync is this great thing called leaked credentials. Now we're going to look at this here. Now we can't really look at it too much because again, it's just something that's happening in the back end. But as we are synchronizing our hashes to Office 365, Microsoft will take those hashes and compare them against honeypots, deep web, password breaches and everything. And if they find any of your hashes that are available on the deep web or anywhere in the world, they will let you as an administrator know that, hey, you have some passwords that have been essentially breached and they're leaked through the internet. You can do that. Nothing really will ever give you that type of functionality here. This is just one of those pieces. Reduce your attack surface area here. Use cloud authentication. Block legacy. This is such a big thing, and this is going to happen here very, very soon. Legacy authentication is going out the door. All of these old versions, legacy authentication, POP, IMAP, SMTP. If you know what these are, you know that they are bad. If you don't know what they are, don't even worry about them. Just know that they're bad, and we're going to be blocking them here very, very soon. Looking at a lot of these review and govern admin roles. What did I say? One of the biggest piece here, zero trust. We want to make sure that they're using the principle of least privilege, as well as auditing and looking at our admin accounts. PIM. We're going to look at PIM, an IPAM, privileged access management. We're going to say, hey, what the heck do these people actually have? We're going to look through that. Automate threat response, sign-in risk. We're going to look at these here too. Sign-in risk is great. I'm not going to go too far into it here because I want to talk more about it. This is as users are signing in. We're able to assess risk at sign-in based off of those signals. Remember what I said before, 6.5 trillion signals? Well, we get some nice analytics around that stuff. All right, Defender with identity protection, Defender Suite. We will look at a little bit of Defender here. We're going to try and use Defender for Endpoint a tiny bit here. We're going to use Defender for Office 365. We will look at Defender for Cloud Apps, but we probably won't touch too much for Defender for Identity. But again, this is a boot camp, beginner boot camp, not really designed for super in-depth. I will have another course at some time that will be in-depth around those two. Setup, monitor, and learning, very important, using SIM tools. That's another discussion for another day. Monitor, monitor, monitor. Always want to do that. And then finally, enablement, end user self-service. Big. We're actually going to set up self-service password reset here. We're going to set up access reviews. We're going to look at some of these things on here. And this is also another one. And we just got to have a discussion around implemented automated user provisioning. So how do we do this whole process here? That's another piece, HR-driven provisioning. We just talked about that. These are all Microsoft's best practices when it comes down to it. This is not the end-all be-all. And if you don't do every single thing on here, it doesn't mean that you're compromised or you're not doing anything bad. The biggest piece here, protect it with MFA. That's all I can really say. That is the biggest, I guess, takeaway from this discussion here is MFA. With that being said, we're going to run into two labs back to back. The first one, we're going to start looking at some company branding, self-service password reset, as well as, most importantly, looking at some of the password policies. Then the final one, we're going to do conditional access, or excuse me, not the final one, but the next one, we're going to be using conditional access and setting up MFA. With that being said, I hope you learned a little bit here on this particular one, but we're going to jump into some fun labs here in just a minute.